Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Conscious Grief series. Today, I am joined by Mark Lemon. Mark is a writer, a podcaster, and really a grief speaker and advocate of speaking about grief. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so delighted to have you. Really looking forward to this conversation. And now you have a very, very successful podcast called Grief is My Superpower, which I love this name. This is a great name. And obviously this is what you're doing all the time now, speaking about grief, but that wasn't always the case, was it? So perhaps you could firstly share with the listeners what happened in your childhood and your journey to now a little bit.
Sure. So, like you mentioned, for a long time, I didn't talk about what had happened to me. And just to give some context around my experience with grief and why we're speaking today, on the 12th of May, 1992, my dad was murdered, which is, there's never an easy thing to say, never an easy thing to think about. And, I guess to give you some context around the story, we had a cleaner who became a friend of the family. She was going through a very sort of difficult end of her marriage, and her husband was very jealous, and he'd check her posts and he'd follow her to the houses that she went to see if she was having affairs and things like that. So she had her post redirected to our house, and my mum and my dad would give it to her either when she was cleaning at our house or we would drop it off to her wherever she was working. And on the 12th of May, 1992, my dad took her mail over to a house that she was cleaning at in a village just outside Cambridge, where I'm from. And the man had followed his wife to the house, and he turned up and saw my dad's car outside and thought he'd put two and two together. And he went to a local supermarket and stole a boning knife. And he went back to the house and went around the back of the house, I believe, where he found my dad and the lady having a coffee in the kitchen. And he burst in. They had an altercation where my dad got the better of him, I believe, from the sort of reports, and went to grab his suitcase, and the man just pulled out the knife and stabbed him in the heart. And then once again, I believe, in the throat, and then killed him instantly, and then turned on his wife, stabbed her twice. She managed to get away and call for help. And then he turned on my dad again and stabbed him a further sort of 15 times. And then ran out the house and buried the knife in the garden, but he was caught up with, soon after. And, from my perspective, I was at school. It was like the end of the school day, and it was around 3:10 in the afternoon, and the school bell goes at 3:15. And so I remember seeing a teacher come into the classroom and go over to the person that was teaching us and sort of whispered to them. And then they came up to me and said, "Oh, Mark, your mum wants you to go home urgently," which I thought was really strange, because obviously the school bell was about to ring. And so I quickly ran to get my bike, and actually, it's kind of one of those memories you remember, because my bike was locked to my friend, and I had to run back, get him to come and unlock it. And then I started cycling home, and I just remember sort of pinching myself, because I really did feel like something awful had happened. There's like a sense, a wave that you have. And I remember pulling up or cycling into the close, because we lived in this sort of close. There's like a green in front of you, so you have to cross over, and there's parked cars there. And I remember sort of looking to my right and seeing police cars in the parked car area. And as I got closer to the house, I could hear crying in the front room, and it was my sister. And I sort of walked through the living room past all these strangers, guys in suits and a couple of police officers. And my aunt sort of said, "Oh, your mum wants to see you upstairs." And I just remember going upstairs. She took me into the spare room and just said, "Dad died this morning." And You know, it's always that bit. I'm always all right. And then it's that bit, you know, because it kind of, it's that moment of realization that, yes, this is real. And yes, this has happened. And so, yeah, actually always telling that bit, it always kind of gets me. But so, yeah, I hugged my mum for about a minute and I just I couldn't stay in the house, had to get out. And so, I went to school and I saw a friend of mine whose dad had died a couple of years before. And I just kind of whispered to her, "Dad died this morning," dropped to my knees and started crying. And obviously at that point, all the people were coming out of the school because it was the driveway. And so a couple of teachers sort of saw and took me back into school and yeah, but it was only until that evening I went back to a friend's house after school because I still didn't want to go back and back home. And my uncle sort of sat me down and told me what had happened, and you know, and yeah, that was the moment that sort of, you know, my life changed forever, took on new meaning. You know, I know, you know, you talk to bereaved people all the time and, you know, it's that kind of, there's that cut, there's that before and after, you know, before they died and then after. And it's so weird. You know, I think particularly because I was 12 years old, it felt like I had a really short moment in time with that 12-year-old. And then everything else was like, you know, that's the rest of my life and who I am now, you know. And so that boy had kind of changed forever, you know, and I think, you know, and that goes for whatever age you're at. It's not just being 12, you know, you could be 60 and you lose your parent and, you know, and it's the same there because you just lose something inside of you. And yeah, so that's kind of what happened.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And my heart really just goes to you. And I'm so sorry that your family had to go through all of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying, you know, the 12 years old, it's kind of like this middle of your childhood and this life-changing, devastating event happens. And I read the article that you had written for The Guardian, which, well, it seems like that was kind of a pivotal moment for you in your experience as well. There was something you wrote in that article that really resonated with me, that one of your family friends had said to you, "Oh, you are the man of the family now."
Yeah.
And you're the only son and you have two sisters. And so how did that sort of comment impact you? Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of my dad's work colleagues who, you know, I was sort of standing in front of the church and I remember him coming up to me and sort of saying, "Well, you're the man of the house now." I just remember sort of at the time, you know, you don't really think about it. Just, I guess the polite side of me is just like, okay, yeah, so thank you or whatever. And then slowly but surely, subconsciously, it sort of sinks in a bit more as to, okay, yeah, I am the only man in the house, and you know, and how that can kind of, you know, I've written about this before, you know, on my social media, and I know, you know, there's people that say, well, you know, it's meant with love and meant with, you know, this and that, and I'm like, yeah, that's fine. But the reason I share it is so you can educate people just to be mindful of what you do say to people. And so, yeah, I think that kind of really did sit with me and affected me a bit, I think, because I was thinking, okay, well, how am I supposed to take over that mantle of, you know, of what Dad did, you know, because I wouldn't be able to, and I can't. So what do you expect me to do with that, you know? And so I sort of battled with that for, I guess, a little while. And it's comments like that really aren't helpful, and also it kind of suppresses. I think young boys, young men do struggle how to open up. They struggle to know how to express their feelings, and when you're when someone has come up to you and said that to you, there is something inside of you that's like, you have to, it's that classic man up, and it felt like that sort of comment, even though that's not how it was worded. It felt like that's kind of what they meant in a way. So, and I think that's why I really did struggle to express my feelings throughout my teenage years. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was only sort of leading into my sort of mid-20s where I went back and revisited counselling. But yeah, it's words like that can be harming. Yeah.
Yeah, they certainly can. And I think, like you say, it's worth mentioning these things because people say them in a well-meaning manner, but the way that we can internalize things. So a lot of people praise everyone for being strong or being brave. And that can be our sort of natural go-to, in grief, and not want to sort of be vulnerable and open. And maybe that's a coping mechanism as well. But it's just good for people to have awareness around these sorts of comments.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, totally. And like you say, it's done with, more often than not, it's done with care, and they want to, try and help you. But, I guess that's why we do what we do now, is to try and talk and open it up and just let people know who haven't walked the road of grief to how they can support somebody through it. Yeah.
And I love that you're a man doing this as well, this work, and talking about grief. And I know that you're associated with the charity Winston's Wish, which is a charity, for people who don't know about it, here in England. And they are all about bereaved children.
Yeah.
I don't know whether Winston's Wish, when it was founded, Mark, because both of us lost our dads in the early 90s.
Yeah. So I actually did. I'd like to call her a friend now, Julie or Julia, who set up Winston's Wish. And I think it originally started probably like a year, 93, 94, because when I was speaking to her, I did like an Instagram live with her, and she was saying, gosh, how there were lots of people like yourself who would have benefited from the charity, at that time. But unfortunately, it just sort of started shortly after. And that's when it started to, it didn't grow properly, I guess, until sort of 10 years later. But yeah, I mean, how much we would have benefited from having a charity like that in our lives, who you could go and talk to someone, or just at least sit in a room with like-minded people, like-minded children and young people who you could empathize with, because that is what I don't know about you, I'm sure you can understand this too, is that I didn't have anyone around me who I could relate to.
Yeah.
Absolutely nobody at all. And I think that's where I really did struggle as well at school, because I felt like an outcast. No matter what people did to try and make me feel comfortable, which my friends were brilliant. I wouldn't say they verbally tried to support me, but they tried to include me in things, and they were conscious of me and my emotions and my feelings and all that stuff. But there was no one else like me. Well, I'm sure there were. That was the other thing, isn't it? I mean, they say that one in 10 or whatever it is, school children, 1 in 29, sorry, class of school children have experienced a bereavement or loss. But so there must have been others. And I know that, my friend, for instance, who lost her dad a couple of years before mine, I had her to kind of relate to, I guess, but I couldn't speak to her all the time, And so, yeah, charities like that are incredible for kids these days. Yeah.
And when you were sharing, just having as the experience of you that I have, which, you seem such a compassionate and warm and kind person. And I wonder, even the way that your dad died, was helping somebody. And perhaps you could I'm just curious to know your dad a bit more. And could you tell us about him and his name?
Yeah. So his name was James, James Lemon, obviously. And he was a funny character. He was very sporty. So we were the classic sort of son-dad relationship where we would, go and play sport together. I guess mainly we'd go and sort of play each other at tennis, and he would come and watch me play football and take me to these things. And also, you know, I'm forever in his debt for taking the time to take us on holidays, like drive through France, you know, the classic sort of drive from England to Calais, and then, you know, drive through sort of France, Germany, Italy, and just sort of have those amazing experiences, which at a young age really opened my mind. And so he was very passionate about sort of, you know, experiencing new things. And I was telling my wife the other day, I always remember like sitting in the car and he's listening to, you know, those where you're learning a new language and it's the tape, and he'd be like repeating the words after, you know. Mm-hmm. So he was very interested in learning, and he loved his jazz. He'd sort of have a small record collection. So I'd always picture him, say on a Sunday afternoon, he'd have the, you know, back in like the 80s or early 90s, his massive headphones, and he'd be listening to music with his crossword, and he'd have one of those stubby beers, you know, with his legs crossed. And actually, it's funny, my wife was like, you realize you're more like your dad than you know, because you've got, you know, look at yourself and how you're sitting and legs crossed and all that stuff. So I had 12 years of getting to know him, with, you know, in a really lovely way. But of course, it sort of, it hurts to not have got to know him better and experience seeing my children, seeing me get married, being there when I first had Otis. I think that's why I was so emotional when I first had Otis, because, you know, not only was it a long night of labour, but of sort of coming out of the theatre, because we had to go in the theatre and then sort of a bit drama, and then came out and he was born, and Simone's mum was there, and I just remember bursting into tears, just saying, it's a boy. I would have done the same thing if it was a girl, but there has always been that something that's slightly different for me because of the relationship that I had with my dad, you know, that father-son relationship, which, you know, now I like to think I have with my son. And so actually it's quite beautiful, because I try and live how I think my dad did through me, which was all positive. And so I'm very thankful for that, you know, and getting to know him that way. And like we said earlier, it took me a very long time to get to the point of expressing my grief, expressing my trauma, and understanding that it's still with me. It walks with me. It is who I am, because I suppressed it and ignored it for so long, you know. So,
which I'm super interested to hear a little bit more about that, you know, because at what stage was it in your life that you decided that you were like, I think I need to do some work around this?
Yeah, I think sort of in my, like I said earlier, my mid-20s, I thought, I don't know, I thought in the relationship I was in at the time, I think maybe I was showing signs of just sort of struggling, you know, maybe a bit with my mental health. I think she sort of said, well, you know, have you thought about speaking to someone? And so I explored it, looked into Cruse, which is quite funny going back to Cruse after. They kind of supported me a little bit after my dad died, but it was all too soon. It felt too soon. It was sort of a few months after, and I didn't really know how to express or talk about what had happened. And so, yeah, I went and had counselling when I was about 26 for about 6 weeks, just weekly sessions, talking about my feelings, how my grief was. And it was really helpful, and it kind of opened my mind to understand that I still struggled and still battled with, you know, what had happened. And but then, as is always the case, I'd kind of thought I'd move on, suppressed it a little bit more. And then, yeah, like we spoke about earlier, the Guardian newspaper approached me in 2017, which was actually supposed to be for the children's books that I write, around the diversity of the books and, you know, the lack of and all that stuff. in the industry. And then I think I'd mentioned it in an article I did for the Cambridge Evening News, and they were like, well, would you be interested in writing about what happened to your dad? I thought, well, firstly, I was a bit apprehensive, a little bit scared, I guess, because I was writing for a national newspaper and sharing my story really publicly. But I guess that it was like one of those things that you kind of have to dive into. You know, it's like that black hole. You're going to jump into it. You don't know what's going to happen. It's either going to really mess you up or do good. And thankfully, it kind of did a bit of both, to be fair, because I had to really, I think my sister sent me the old newspaper clippings of what happened, because she sort of cut them out from what happened when my dad died. And so I had to read all of that and the detail, because I think I'd built my own story in my head as to what had happened, you know, I without, say, the intricacies of the details of what had happened. And that was tough, because I got to understand it a bit better as to everything that went on. You know, I guess my mum was quite good at sort of shielding me and my younger sister. My older sister was 17, so she was more aware of, you know, all the press and the media and everything that went on around it. So that was hard. I sort of had to, but I also had to condense it into 1,500 words, which
Crazy.
is hard, you know. And so, yes, I do remember, I literally remember sitting in the living room, writing it and just being in bits, in tears, and just because, you know, like anything, it's kind of just bringing it all up to the surface. It's kind of taking you back to that day. It's kind of making you understand a little bit more about what my dad would have suffered. And thankfully, he didn't suffer too much because he died instantly. But yeah, so then that was published, and it was, you know, in the family section and the double page spread, and there was sort of pictures of me and my family and well, Simone and the kids. And so, but after that, it kind of, I'd had messages from people who'd sort of say, thank you for writing about it. Thank you for talking about it. And then from there onwards, it kind of really opened my mind to speaking more openly on my social media about it and writing about it. And then slowly but surely, I'd sort of moved away from the books to talking about being a dad, you know, which mainly back then I was kind of talked about. And then now my page is just grief, you know, and talking about bereavement. And it just feels like a natural progression as to where I am today, because I always say that I write what I write on a daily basis because it's cathartic for me. And then if it resonates and helps others, then that's brilliant. But you realize that even though everyone's experience is unique and different, we all have felt that same heartache and pain, you know? So yeah, that's kind of what that article has really, you know, done for me.
Yeah, it's really transformed a lot. And through that, and like you say, doing the research and really going back to that time in your life and having, by the sounds of it, like a lot of processing that happened. How do you feel a difference in yourself?
Yeah, I do. I feel I understand what I've gone through a little bit more. I feel I can maybe pinpoint the emotions that I feel on a daily basis a little bit more. But I think if anything, it's just given me the permission to feel those feelings. And whereas before I would try and ignore them, or I'd put them down to something else. And, you know, before, say, as an example, obviously next week is the anniversary of my dad's death, and it's 30 years. And so now I'm more conscious of how maybe I am leading up to the anniversary and what my emotions are. It's not just about, it's about, I'm more conscious about like the weather and, you know, just I'm just sort of trying to, like last night, I went to play football, and there was like you know, when things go a little bit warmer and there's that sort of spring sort of evening, and And it sounds really weird, but I felt my dad, and I felt him last night, and it's like he's with me. And so, and part of me, sort of, it's kind of taught me to do that more often, and sort of just be more conscious of him and feeling him. And do you know what? I had such a great time. I was like laughing and I was smiling. And that's the other thing about grief, is it doesn't have to be the sadness all the time. You can feel your loved ones in things that you like doing, you know, that, you know, whatever it is that reminds you of them, you know, it's about kind of just having a moment of smiling and just thinking about them, you know. It doesn't have to be down and sad all the time, because it's not, you know. I think that's what people think about the bereaved, is, oh, they're just, you know, and probably think about me because I write so much on my Instagram page. Oh, he's banging on about that again. But I get more comfort from doing that, you know, than suppressing it.
Yeah, and being, you know, authentic about it. And I think that sometimes even, you know, I relate to that, and I think, oh, I think even when I was younger, I'd not talk about it as well, because I never wanted people to think that I was like attention seeking, for example. And so even that comes up for me a little bit occasionally when I post something on Instagram. And I have had people say to me, and very recently, like, are you not over this yet? Like, why do you keep having to talk about this? And it's just like, well, unless you have been through something like this, it's very difficult to understand why we do that.
Yeah. And I've got to the point now where, you know, I couldn't give a shit.
Yeah.
I really couldn't, you know, but I get you. Like, at first I was like posting these things or writing about them, sharing them. I was like, oh God, you know, am I talking about this too much? And then, you know what it is that pulls me back is like, someone's comment of, my husband died 5 days ago, and your account came up, however it did, and I'm so pleased that I've come across your words, or whatever it is. And that's bigger than me. That's something else going on in the world, you know, like a higher power, whatever it is. But there's something that's kind of gravitated to say, okay, I'm with, and I always make sure I respond, and I leave a voice note, and I just say, look, you know, just, you're not alone. You're honestly not alone, because that is the power of social media in a positive light, because it's a place where people can go and understand that they're not on their own, and there are lots of other people who are experiencing that on a daily basis. Because otherwise, you'd have so many people wandering around, not knowing where to put it, you know. Which is the great thing about what you're doing as well. It's like, you know, it's a place where people can go and listen to conversations and just kind of relate to others.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think social media, in particular Instagram, has been revolutionary, you know, for people to express themselves. And like you say, for people who are in a lot of pain and in a lot of grief, to be able to search on Instagram and find people like yourself to really, you know, make them feel less alone and normalize a lot of the feelings that are happening. Because even, like you said, looking back over your childhood and thinking, well, this was my experience. I was thinking so much like, oh my gosh, so many of these things were normal that I was experiencing. No wonder I've had difficulty in relationships, you know, but I didn't know those things until more recently in my life. And what's amazing now is we're sort of like rapidly getting way more aware about this process. And that's why I call this the Conscious Grief series, because I felt for so long I was wandering around very unconscious in my grief and repressing it and thinking that happened a really long time ago, so that my problems cannot be related to that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it all relates to that. And you've got, when you think about all these people of our age, of younger, you know, they've struggled with trauma. You know, people who suffer with mental health, there's always a catalyst to something, and bereavement is very high up there on that list of why someone might be feeling how they do. But people don't think of it as, okay, well, that happened such and such amount of years ago. they should be over it now. No, that seed, which started about, this big, has now grown out to be that big because they haven't addressed it and they haven't resolved it and they haven't, found a way to express it. And that's why I am so passionate, and I'm sure the same with you, because when you experience grief at a young age, you know the damage it can do through not talking about it and not opening up and not sharing it, with whoever it might be, because it will just seed and fester, and you'll have battles with mental health later on in life. And that's why, again, with the pandemic and everything that's gone on, people have got waiting lists of going to see, even charities like Cruse, they're inundated. They can't take everybody on. And they've said it themselves, they're struggling because they don't have the support in their organization to be able to take all these people on. And so you're just going to have lots of people who are going to be struggling in the next few years and more if it's not supported now. So This is why podcasts like yourself and mine as well, it's not saying this is where you'll go for professional support, but it's somewhere where you can go and just feel a bit of comfort while you're going through this period. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. And I asked this question really as a bit of fun, and it's your own interpretation about what do you think conscious grief is? Okay.
Conscious grief. Yeah, I think for me personally, it's just about acknowledging on a day-to-day basis how you're feeling, really, and being honest with yourself, really, as well. And also just finding a way to use that conscious grief, whatever it is. It's exercise, writing, drawing, recording a podcast, talking to people. That is all being conscious about how you're feeling and your grief. So I think it's finding ways to help yourself in whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be the sort of generic, it can, anything that lifts your spirit, lifts your mood. So for me, I'd say probably the writing, I think. And then, I enjoy sort of playing football, and so just having an hour running around the football pitch with a load of other men of age. It's just, it's great socially, and also it's just a good release. It makes you forget. I'm trying to slowly but surely build myself up to try the, cold ice.
Oh, yeah.
Or like last week I had a conversation with Wim Hof.
Fantastic.
And it was through the book I'm currently writing, and he gave me a call, which was really surreal. And because I've been trying to reach him, and then he got in touch with me, and he's such a lovely guy. But so he's kind of inspired me slightly to maybe try at least cold showers a little every now and then. So that might be a good way of mental health and trying to sort of be that conscious grief and sorting things out that way. But there's so many ways, aren't there, that you can.
So many ways. And actually it reminded me because as I said at the beginning, I love the name of your podcast, Grief is My Superpower. And would you share sort of the moment that you came up with that, or how you came up with that?
Yeah. It's a funny one, actually. I was thinking, what would I call a podcast? And then it just struck me, really, because grief has been my superpower. I know it's very difficult for people in the early stages of grief to understand that. How could that possibly be your superpower? How it's such a horrendous thing to happen to you, which it is. But once you've lived with it for a short while, or however long it is, you do understand that when you've experienced something so traumatic and so life-changing as the death of a loved one, everything else can be that little bit easier in your life, because you've experienced this heartache and pain. And so for me, I, throughout my life, have tried to harness my dad and harness what I've gone through as a positive, to just kind of just go for things and just try and just work hard at things, and, you know, to honor him, but also myself, to say this horrendously shit thing hasn't pushed you down a path of, you know, I guess self-destruction was the word that's come into my head, which it could have done. And for a while it probably did, but then I found the space in my mind to say, no, keep going, you know. And so when I was thinking about the podcast and the title of it, I just thought grief is my superpower, because I want it to be my superpower, to try and open up the conversation and help other people make sense of their own grief. And maybe at some point they will find grief to be their superpower in whatever way it is. And so yeah, that's kind of how I came up with it.
Well, I love it. I think it's such an awesome title. So,
oh, thanks.
And as you said, not everybody at the beginning will think, how could this be, you know, something that I can use for greater good? But it gives us like, as you say, a deeper appreciation for certain things, or I think for me, it made me not sweat the small stuff in life.
Yeah.
It gave me a sense of courage to do things. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the thing with grief is that it can knock your confidence when it's happened at the immediate, you know, months, years, you know. And I had that myself, like through my teenage years. All my friends went to uni. I didn't leave school with great GCSEs, and, you know, they all had the classic path of coming out. They got, you know, reasonably good GCSEs, great GCSEs, went on to university and did that path. Whereas my path is one which has been, I guess when you lose someone at a young age, you know, your path, whatever it's going to be, is never going to be a usual, you know, a sort of a standard one anyway. But for me, like you said, you know, like leaving my old job to go and write children's books, you know, I was like, why not? Like tomorrow, and it's a cliche, but tomorrow isn't promised for anybody at all. I could walk out there and get hit by a bus, you know, and at least I could say that I did that. And I think that's kind of the important message I want to sort of tell my children, is like, and other kids, is like, why would it stop you from doing something? Don't limit yourself to what you can do, you know. And I think we put things in boxes, and we like to sort of say, no, we can't do this, we must do that for the rest of our lives, or we must, you know. And it's like, no, you know, because my dad's life certainly wasn't promised. And on the 12th of May in 1992, that was the day that he died, and his life stopped. And so I think that's why I've kind of lived my life of, why wouldn't you want to do a podcast and call it Grief is My Superpower? Why wouldn't you want to write a book about your experience? Why wouldn't you want to talk about your grief publicly? You know, what's stopping you from doing that? And I think usually those that might, like you were saying about, you know, sharing your feelings with people, those that might judge you were those that are scared of doing things themselves, and a little bit scared of stepping out and off that cliff themselves. Whereas you and I, you know, it's like, just go for it, just do it, you know?
Yeah. I think that's so true. This sort of, I also would think like that. Well, tomorrow I may die. So, you know, living with a sense of, I don't know how long I've got, and I'm going to make difficult changes if they need to be made, or try things, or take risks, you know, that perhaps, like you say, people who didn't have a trauma in their childhood wouldn't have done. Yeah. Mark, anything else? I know we're getting to the time. Would you like to share before we go?
No, I don't. I think it's always the you know, with anyone listening, is like, just, you know, and I guess anyone listening would be touched by grief at some point in their lives, or maybe they know someone, so they're listening to this podcast. But it's just about taking each minute, each day, each hour as it comes, and understanding that no day is ever the same in grief, and that's perfectly normal. And even 30 years later, that's still how I see things, and how what my grief has taught me. And it took me a long time to get there, which is probably why I like to tell people these things during the early stages, is because it's important that people do know that you will never get over the grief. You know, that's the harsh reality, but you will learn how to live with it. You will learn how for it to become a part of you and who you are. And like we talked about, the superpower, you can make it your superpower, and you can channel it in ways that you never thought possible. And it's just about, you know, and it's also the cliche of being kind to yourself. I think it's really important to understand that doing something for you isn't selfish. It's good for you and good for those around you. And I think that's why, you know, my wife is incredible actually, of saying, look, what would stop you from just going to do something for you, or whatever it might be? Just go for a walk, or get some fresh air, or, you know, go to the cinema on your own, or whatever it might be. Because if you're feeling happy after, then everything else around you will benefit. And so that's why it's important that anyone listening sort of takes perhaps that piece of advice.
It's really great advice to, yeah, so thank you. Mark, I am just so grateful to you for saying yes and being here, and for all your words and all the work that you do. You're really, truly a very inspiring human, and thank you. And I'm looking forward to your next book, your new book that's going to be coming soon. And actually, when we'll put a link underneath this, we can put it to your website, and also, to tell people again, Grief is Your Superpower, and your Instagram handle is
Mark Lemon Official.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else that we need to tell people?
No, I think if anyone's, I've also written a children's book called The Magical Wood, which is obviously to support children through grief, and that's available at lemondropbooks.co.uk. I do post to America, because actually more and more people seem to be buying in America and following me on Instagram from America, which is quite interesting. So yeah, if you know, that's always a question actually, do you ship to the US? So yeah.
Okay, good. Great stuff. Well, thank you again, and thank you to everybody who has been watching. Bye-bye.